Coming up on Tech News Weekly, analyzing the perception that video games lead to violence. Also, Samsung announced the Note 10 and had one more thing. And we take a close look at what it's like to live a smartphone life in Venezuela. All that more coming up next on Tech News Weekly.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Tech News Weekly, episode 94, recorded Thursday, August 8th, 2019.
Hello and welcome to Tech News Weekly, the show where we talk to and about the people making and breaking the tech news. I'm Mikah Sargent.
Breaking the tech news. I'm Jason Howell. How you doing, Mikah?
I am doing just peachy keen,
This is your
as they say.
second full-time week here at Twit.
Yes.
One word to summarize.
Wild.
All right, that works.
Thank you. Let's get into things. After two mass shootings in the states of Ohio and Texas that left 31 people dead and many more wounded, media coverage of the shootings has often involved a look into the motivations behind these killings. And yet again, we're seeing a familiar question arise. Could violence in movies, on television, and in video games have motivated these shooters? Well, Russell Hawley from Android Central is here to talk with us about his response to said familiar question. Russell, you wrote a piece entitled, "We've been blaming violence on video games for 20 years, and it's still BS." Can you explain the essence of your piece? What makes it BS?
Yeah, so I mean, this is a conversation that has been had out in public for a very long time now. This started back when Mortal Kombat first came out in 1998, and the violence inherent in that game was something that upset people who had never seen content like that before, and naturally assumed that there must be some sort of connection between that kind of violence and some of the violence they were seeing in the news, on television, or in print, and so. Some research was done, some accusations were made that the violence that we were seeing both on television and in video games were leading to these violent acts. This is a conversation we've been having for 21 years. And one common refrain through that 21 years is actual medical research that proves that it's just simply not accurate. This goes as far back as 2001, where there was a report from the Surgeon General of the United States at the time, where a lot of research was done to prove whether this was accurate, and the result was in fact that the environment around a child has significantly more to do with whether they are more prone to violence than the media diet that they have, be it things that they have read or things that they have played or things that they have seen. And that research has only continued to be stronger over the last couple of years. That we've seen more and more research called, more studies called for over the last couple of years. It's increased dramatically over the last couple of years as we've seen reports of Fortnite being addictive, as we've seen reports of bullying and hate speech across things like voice communication in games. And that actually is the one part of this that is inconclusive so far, is through things like Xbox Live and PlayStation Online, the kind of constant barrage of insults that you receive, and that can actually be somewhat mentally damaging, but not anywhere near the scale of just being around people that are just straight up hateful and negative.
Now, I wanted to talk about, you shared an anecdote in the piece about playing Mortal Kombat at your local arcade, and then there was a time where a mom was standing kind of in front of the game and said, "No, you can't play this game." And you said that there was a research paper that was discussed on the local news that kind of scared this person and made them think like, "Oh no, we shouldn't have our kids playing this game. I need to talk to their parents." My question for you, do you think that that's where most of these connections come from, is sort of like filtered through local news and headlines, or does it come from parents in the homes watching these games and maybe not understanding it? Basically, I'm wondering where you think that fear that has been around for this 21 years, where has that sprung from?
I think it comes from two places. The first is that we're dealing with the generation that is growing up now is the only generation that has had video games the violent video games from the beginning of its life until the end of its life, right? Like these games were not around when I was 5 and 6, and so the generation that raised us, they didn't encounter this until significantly later in life. So obviously seeing this kind of radical shift in gameplay, video games, started as kind of Pong and Pac-Man and then became this kind of violent, aggressive thing. And there was a time where these games, where the game developers were kind of intentionally pushing the boundaries to see how far they would go. There was a period of time where a game called Carmageddon was actually banned in the United States due to this research from violent video games, because there were point modifiers for running people over in the game. But we would kind of, I would not laugh, but we would, the concept of banning a game like that today, in a world where Grand Theft Auto Online is one of the most popular games on the planet, is just not something that would happen now, because of the research that we've done to show that it's just simply not as impactful as kind of the shock value that you get from having seen it from the first time.
Yeah. Now, something that's making the rounds, I saw it on Twitter a couple of days ago, Vox wrote an article about it, I'm sure there have been plenty of other articles about it, is this chart that shows countries ranked by video game revenue paid on a per person basis, sitting right next to a chart that shows violent gun deaths. We actually have that link. Yeah, it's right there. And it's pretty stark what you see there, right? Tell me what you see through your lens. What does this chart illustrate for you? And I think it kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so there's two things to keep in mind here. One is, there are plenty of countries in the world where video games are played where gun violence is not a thing because guns are not accessible in those areas. But that chart, it's important to kind of take that a step back, right? Because that does not mean that there is no violence in those areas. There are certainly knife violence and things like that, and those can be quite devastating in their own right in those same countries. But it is simply true that gun violence is significantly higher here because guns are more available. And that is something that's just not going to change anytime soon in our country. So that chart is impactful in the way that it highlights two things. One is that games really are played all over the world, but in no place in the world is there a point where the act of playing a game makes you more violent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of been the belief, or not the belief, but the researched fact for 21 years. And in fact, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you about next. We've had more than 20 years of studies that continue to show there is, I think you said, the Surgeon General's report back in 2001 showed a small reduction in empathy and potentially an increase in the chances that someone would act aggressively, but that those impacts are very small in comparison. So if we have all of this research out there, why do you think it's still being used to explain violent actions?
It's a really easy crutch, right? Like the people who are listening to this and looking for an answer, but not looking for an answer that leads to kind of immediate action. This is the kind of response that you get. It's not going to end in violent video games being banned because a lot of these places, a lot of the same people who are advocating for this kind of research are looking at those results at the same time that the rest of us are. The conversation around this is frankly a little on the ridiculous side because it's a very common scapegoat, and no new research has ever pointed to this being the case. The point that you made about the increased aggression and kind of the increase in rapid response to things. It's actually kind of fascinating the way that research gets interpreted by different parties. That is also seen as a positive when it comes to reacting in certain situations. For example, people who play more driving video games where they have the steering wheel are frequently found to be better reacting in emergency situations that could otherwise lead to automobile accidents by being able to quickly navigate those situations because they're so used to that kind of twitch environment because they're constantly playing those games. So it is the way that it gets parsed is really kind of fascinating. The way that you said it, which is the way that it is often read, it sounds like someone is becoming more aggressive in a violent way when it really is interpreted by the science community as being more reactionary. Which is very rarely a negative thing in most cases.
Yeah, another context. One study that I found from the American Psychological Association said that it found, quote, scant evidence of a correlation between playing violent games and violent activities. But Dr. Ferguson, who led the committee, said the data on bananas causing suicide is about as conclusive. Literally, the numbers work out to about the same. Which just kind of goes to show, I'm sure there are equal number, of studies that could be inferred or interpreted to mean the other side, right? Like we're kind of caught in this weird world, this nebulous world of studies that contradict each other, and there's no easy answer. There's no easy one thing to point to, which ultimately is what people want. People are looking for that one thing that they can point to, and that's just not going to happen.
Right. And a result of all of this research, as you just pointed out, is that there's a ton of kind of outlier data that can be fished out and read. Another example of that is that in many places in the United States, when a very, very popular game comes out, for a brief period of time, crime and violence actually goes down. For say a 48-hour period, and so the logical conclusion to that, without any other evidence, in that bubble, is that people are too busy playing video games to go out and commit crimes. That's probably not what's actually happening. There's not enough data to actually lean in that way, but it doesn't, stop someone from drawing that conclusion.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you write a lot about AR, VR, and other sorts of realities. We know that we've seen some of the links to therapeutic benefits of being able to use virtual reality, augmented reality to improve someone's life through communication and things like that, where they may not be able to get it in the real world. My question for you is, what are your thoughts on, if we see that playing these video games in the way that we are used to now with controllers and through sort of some form of control, do you think that's going to be different when we have these virtual realities? Do you think then there might be an increased impact of video games and its effect on, like you said, or like the Surgeon General said, the reduction in empathy and increased aggression?
This is a really fascinating topic, and it's something that's being actively, hashed out, not just amongst the research community, but also amongst game developers. A very recent example of that kind of immersed violence and the kind of negative effect that it could have is a game that recently came out for PlayStation VR, where as part of an interrogation scene, you have someone tied to a chair, and you're actually, beating on them to get information out of them. You are physically throwing your actual fist in order to get information out of a person that is sitting in front of you. And that's a horrifying, kind of visual and not the kind of thing that you want to, immerse someone in. And there's a lot of people in the virtual reality community, game developers in particular, who find that level of immersion aberrant and not the direction that they would prefer the community in general go. And that kind of research is happening right now to see, what the impacts of that are, especially since the flip side of that, virtual reality is being used in so many different positive ways for training. Firefighters are using this for actual training. There are Major League Baseball teams that are using the HTC Vive tracking systems to correct batting stances in order to make baseball players more effective. So it's clear that there are very real world effects to using virtual reality in so many different scenarios. It only makes sense that violence would be one of those things. And so, I'm very interested to see how that research goes, because that is a step beyond, what we would consider traditional video games. And sure, if you spend, an hour a day in a video game punching someone in the face, there's a pretty good chance you're going to learn from that what you think the most effective way to hit someone is going to be. And that's probably not great.
So I do want to note kind of the overall discussion here and kind of the conclusion here is that the violence isn't coming from the learned violence isn't coming from the video games, but you put it as like it's the environment. When you raise a child in violence and hatred, teach them to view other human beings as an enemy, and give them easy access to tools designed to kill many people very quickly, this is what you get, and it's BS. Everyone should go check out this article from Russell Hawley on Android Central. Thank you, Russell, for joining us today and talking to us about this. Where can people follow you online?
I am at Russell Hawley on everything, and I welcome all facets of this conversation if you want to talk about it further.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Russell.
We appreciate you listening to Tech News Weekly and all of our Twit podcasts. Every day we have a team of hosts, producers, editors, engineers, and support staff all working to get our content to you. And as you know, our podcasts are free and ad-supported. So the easiest thing you can do to help our network is to subscribe to this show and all your favorite Twit.tv podcasts. Subscribing means you'll get each new episode the moment it publishes. Thanks for listening, and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatcher or visit twit.tv/subscribe for more details.
So just yesterday, Samsung held its big Unpacked event in New York City. There, it unveiled some things that we already knew about and also happened to have a few surprises along the way, which surprised me that there were even surprises to begin with anymore at events. Welcome back to the show, Dan Ackerman, who has been following the Samsung announcements very closely. How are you doing, Dan?
I am well, and I also enjoy a nice surprise sometimes.
But we're just not used to it anymore. Like, I felt like with the surprises yesterday, it almost took me aback. You actually have the new Note 10 Plus, or at least you've had some hands-on time with it right now. Is it kind of your reviewing daily driver right now? What's your initial take on the device?
Not at all. I had it this morning briefly to take on TV with me. Then they put it in the locked box, and the burly security guard handcuffed it to his wrist. And get to play around with it in the green room for quite a while. I did some augmented reality doodling on people's faces, flicked the camera around with the stylus. So, you know, the big beats.
Yeah, the things that everybody's going to do for like 10 minutes when they first get the phone and then forget that it even exists on the phone anymore. Or is that projecting too much? I don't know. I feel like Samsung's really good at these splashy features that you use a couple of times and then you kind of like, it just goes back to being a phone. What do you think?
Yeah, feature creep. You know, everybody has it, and you learn one or two of them that you use all the time. Then the rest you just forget are there, and maybe the company forgets it's there. Next time they don't even mention it. I do like the flipping the camera from the front to the back with the stylus just by going like this with your hand. I could see that being, you know, useful if you don't want to crane your finger around to do it.
Yeah, that's the gesture control features that are definitely one of the big key features. And this is kind of a trend to expect, right? The Pixel 4 is supposedly going to have the Soli radar, and that's going to be for mid-air gesture control. I mean, is this just a kind of feature that really looks great on a spec sheet, or do you actually envision like people are going to start using this stuff and go, "Whoa, wait a minute, this is the next thing that I'm looking for in a phone"?
It depends on how you implement it. I've seen gesture control in things for years. There were laptops where the webcam would enable gesture control. I've seen TVs with gesture control to raise the volume or change the channel. Frankly, none of them ever really worked that well. At least with this one, it's not a camera, it's the stylus itself and a little gyroscope action or however they track the movement. I wouldn't use it for more than just like flicking the camera lens back and forth. And I guess if you're spending all that extra money to get the model with the stylus, they got to keep adding features to the stylus so you feel like you have to keep getting notes versus, you know, cheaper phones. But yeah, total feature creep happens all the time. Every once in a while, you run across a feature that you go, oh yeah, okay, this is just the way it is now.
Yeah, right.
So Dan, you know, we've got all these fun new features, but something that is tried and true, and I hate to mention it, but I have to bring it up. How are we feeling about no headphone jack? Is this just something that people have to stop complaining about? Or are we gonna, is this always gonna be a thing? No more headphone jack?
You know, for years, it was very interesting. During the Samsung presentation, they did not mention the headphone jack situation. Whereas in previous years, they have gone out of their way to say, listen, these Apple guys, they got rid of their headphone jack, but we understand you, the consumer, we still have the headphone jack in there until the year when they take it out, and then all of a sudden, nobody mentions it. Now, you could say that they finally hit a tipping point where more people use wireless headphones than not, and okay, it makes sense, but people will always, you know, complain at least until they're no longer making consumer-level headphones with those little plugs on them. People still complain if their laptop doesn't have a VGA port sometimes. It can't please.
Yeah.
That said, I still like a headphone because I have some fancy headphones, but I admit I'm in the minority, and I guess we're just all gonna have to get used to this.
Yep, right. You're not going to take out your giant headphones and plug them into your phone anymore. Oh no, you're going to get those little respectable earbuds that connect wirelessly.
Or spend $10 for the dongle.
That's true. Well, and that's actually a question that I had because I can't say that I read that anywhere. Do you happen to know if the box includes the dongle, or is this something that you have to pick up as an extra?
A new pair of earbuds. I think they're AKG earbuds with a USB-C plug.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I feel like we've seen that before, so that makes a lot of sense. Should Samsung be concerned about what we're seeing lately in the premium market of smartphones, sagging sales? Samsung, of course, announced this on their earnings. Apple's made mention of this. Google's made mention of this, that the 3A sold better than their high-end Pixels. Seems like there's a little bit of a pushback on this super high-end premium price point that we're seeing now. The Note 10 absolutely falls into that price point. What do you think? Should Samsung be a little bit concerned?
Well, everybody should be concerned because we've hit this plateau in phone design and features where everything looks like a big slab of glass and metal, and they all kind of look the same and feel the same. And you've hit a saturation point where everyone who didn't have a smartphone before now has one that's within several years old. And frankly, they last, a few years longer than the phone companies would like you to think they last. And they're not the only ones who have had this problem. The TV manufacturers had this problem once everyone traded up to a flat screen TV, and they try to come up with new ways to get you to buy a new TV, even though your old one is fine. And the movie people had trouble with this once you bought all the DVDs. Well, what are we going to do now? We need a new format. So everyone in any industry, if you're successful enough for long enough, as smartphones were, you hit the point where everyone's got one. And the upgrade cycle slows down. It's not every 12 months, 18 months. It goes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I see people bragging to me about their, iPhone 6S's because they've held on to it so long, and that's a point of personal pride.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. What happened to Bixby? I thought it was kind of interesting that the only real mention of Bixby that I saw, we were covering the event live, watching the stream and covering it on the network. The only mention that I really noticed of Bixby was prior to the event. They were showing Bixby ads, but there was nothing in the event. Is there even a Bixby button on this phone? What's going on with Bixby?
Bix who? I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Not familiar with that person.
Okay.
No. The dedicated button is gone. Not that anyone thought that was a good idea in the first place.
Right.
I see those same Bixby ads before the event. We're all saying, well, first of all, it's at the Barclays Center, which is in Brooklyn. Very nice new, sports stadium. I went to the Overwatch finals there like last year. So cool space. We're all lined up outside. It starts to rain. Do they open the doors and let us in? No, of course not. Once they finally do, we get inside, we sit down, and they're running a loop of the same 4 commercials over and over again at top volume. And the Bixby one was only the second most annoying. The most annoying was the crying baby one, because you have a crying baby incredibly loud over and over and over again. So I would have watched the Bixby one another 10 times instead. And they were positioning it as a hands-free assistant to book an Uber and get a restaurant reservation and all the things all the other digital assistants already do.
Yeah, yet they're de-emphasizing it, obviously.
Something that was interesting to me is this DeX feature. It lets you use your Note like a computer with Mac and Windows, which I find interesting. What's your take on that? Do you see a lot of people running the USB between their laptops and their phone and making use of this new platform here?
It's like the third bite at the, well, I'm not going to say bite at the apple. Excuse me. This is the third time, this is the third revision of this DeX concept, which is an interesting concept. I'm not sure it's one anyone's really looking for. Originally, it was a dock that you would plug your phone into, and the dock would connect to a keyboard and a mouse and a monitor, and then you'd get a specialized version of the OS up on the screen with a couple of apps that were optimized for a desktop-looking screen rather than a phone. And they did a couple of versions of the dock. So now they're going dockless. You just plug into an actual laptop or a computer, and then you get to kind of split the screen and get anything that's on your phone. You can access it and use some of those special apps. I think more interesting is you can drag and drop between a Windows machine or a Mac and the phone without having to email yourself files. So, I feel that's pretty useful. I don't know if I'm going to reach for a cable all that often. We're moving towards the laptops. We're all moving towards USB-C only. Very few ports and connections. Everything is a wireless connection. So adding more cables to it, I don't know if that does anything for us, but if you want to just have your phone and keep all your work on it and not worry about getting it out into the wild, it's almost like you're carrying everything on a super secure, mini hard drive personal computer, because that's really what your phone is.
Yeah, maybe this is some sort of long-term play. They figure if they chip away at this 10 years down the line, everybody's going to be using their Samsung computer that runs entirely off their phone versus anything else. But I'd be very surprised, to be honest. You also got some time with the announced Galaxy Book S. I don't know if anyone really had that on their bingo card. What did you think of the Book S? Did it take you by surprise, and how did it look?
We knew it was coming. That was another of the things that had leaked, but we didn't know it was coming at this phone event. We figured it was coming at like IFA later in August. So when they said, oh, look, we got a laptop too, I said, all right, here we go. So I went to look at it. It's actually different than I expected. What it is it's one of this very small breed of laptops that's a little bit of a laptop phone hybrid, in that it runs a Qualcomm Snapdragon CPU instead of an Intel one. Now, a couple of years ago, a lot of companies jumped on this bandwagon for a little while. ASUS had one called the NovaGo, HP had one, Lenovo had one. And the argument was, if we use what's essentially a phone chip in the laptop, it'll still run Windows just fine, but it's a lot easier to have that always on 4G or LTE connection because it acts like a phone, really. And you'll get like 24 hours of battery life. It'll be amazing. In reality, none of those things were true. We tested all of them, and they lasted 12 or 13 hours, which is very good, but it ain't 24 hours. The performance was about what you'd expect running a laptop off a phone chip. It was kind of sluggish. And there were a few incompatibilities between ARM and Windows. It wasn't that bad. Every once in a while, we'd run into something that wouldn't work right. I don't think the regular, average user would notice it, but for the premium they were charging for these things, it certainly didn't seem worth making the jump. You'd almost do better just getting a Chromebook, which also have very long, battery life, but costs less and feel better. So this is a new attempt at this. If anyone could do a nice version, I'm sure Samsung can. It seemed very nice in person. We will have to test it and see if it gets anywhere close to 24 hours on any of our battery tests. And if it feels like you're not taking a step down from using a standard Intel-powered Windows laptop.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big trade-off there. Satya Nadella made a surprise appearance. Truly a one more thing at Samsung's event yesterday. Why was he there? Like, I know that we were surprised and like, whoa, that's a huge get. But then as we kind of listened to Satya, we're like, okay, what is he actually saying here? Like this, he's not really announcing anything, right?
Well, that was the thing. They said, okay, we got a big surprise. I'm like, whoa, what is this? An awesome new product? Is that little home speaker finally coming out? A VR headset? What's happening here? Satya comes out, okay, that's cool. What are they going to talk about? There's some general handshaking and platitudes about working together and stuff. And then he just leaves. And I turn to the person next to me and I go, did I miss something? Were they supposed to announce? I think it's some sort of cooperation on cloud services and other stuff, but it was extremely unclear and extremely unfun.
Yeah, but surprising nonetheless. So at least they got the headline there that Satya made, showed everyone that Satya and Microsoft are friends with Samsung. So, do you think it says anything about Microsoft's mobile strategy that they were on stage with Samsung, kind of like a further kind of conceding of the mobile space?
Well, Samsung did go through great pains to point out that the DeX stuff that we just talked about works with Microsoft Office, and that's the example for a lot of it. So clearly, there's a little back and forth going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on today. Dan Ackerman with CNET.com. Where can people find you online?
On Twitter, I guess, at Dan Ackerman, and just every day here at CNET, just like every day for the last 14 years.
Congratulations, Dan. On 14 more. Thank you, man. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. All right, really interesting story here. With phones like the Note 10 costing roughly $1,000 and offering top-of-the-line specs, it's pretty easy for tech fans, myself included, to fall into the trap of thinking that everyone wants the latest and the greatest, let alone can actually afford to buy whatever happens to be the latest and greatest. But we do know that worldwide that simply is not the case. Android, as a mobile platform, was made to be modified to any number of different device classes. The Xiaomi Redmi Go, for example, costs roughly $65 most places around the globe. But things are much different in Venezuela. And joining me to talk about what it's like living a smartphone life in Venezuela is Arol Wright, who's the author of I felt like it was a fascinating article on XDA Developers. And I'm excited to get you on the show. Welcome, Arol.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to get you on. So first off, let's maybe start talking a little bit about the destabilized economy in Venezuela right now, because it absolutely affects every aspect of the kinds of phones that citizens can afford. What's your take on the economic conditions of the country that influence this?
Well, I actually had to put up a disclaimer at the beginning of my article because the country situation is so volatile and so unstable that actually updating the article figures was going to get pretty time-consuming in the long run.
Yeah.
So right now, the black market rate is sitting around 14,000 bolivars, 14,000. And when I published the article, it was around 12,000. So you see, there was like a 15% increase in just a matter of less than a week. So every time this black market rate increases, so this inflation and prices shoot through the roof. A loaf of bread that used to cost 5,000 bolivars now costs 6,000. And if you don't keep your savings in US dollars or hard currency, and this impacts you directly. People have started to keep some of their savings in US dollars, euros, cryptocurrency, and they even started to do some transactions directly in foreign currency instead of using bolivars. And you see, the funniest thing about all of this is how you can't even predict how the economy behaves. Like right now, prices have started to increase again, but they may not keep increasing next week. Prices may stay the same for a few weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, before the currency suddenly plunged again with the previous notice. And it's actually pretty terrifying sometimes. As I mentioned, some people have started to keep their savings in US dollars, or some of them are even using US dollars directly. It's quite a situation.
And all of these, places that are selling phones in the country, you point out in your piece are working in all of these different currencies, which cannot be an easy situation for any of them. How prevalent is the black market when it comes to buying smartphones in Venezuela? How is that surfacing to the everyday phone buyer there?
It's pretty prevalent, I would say. And pretty much all prices in Venezuela are dictated by this black market rates. Even prices at places like official Samsung stores are based in the black market. And this is because most stores that do take payments in bolivars usually just take that money and exchange it for US dollars immediately in order to avoid inflation from eating it away.
Right.
And pretty much everything you do in Venezuela goes through the black market because, there is an official exchange rate by the government, but you can't just go into the bank and exchange your money. The government has a really tight exchange control mechanism in place. And recently they started to relax it a bit, but it's still a really hard deal. You have to go to the bigger banks, used to get $20 or $50 in cash. And there are limits on how much you can withdraw a day, how much you can exchange a month. It's really complicated.
Yeah, sounds complicated. Now, when you're talking about conversion rates, black market fees, all that kind of stuff, how could the average citizen even afford a smartphone in this climate, let alone a plan for it to run on? Because I imagine, the plan, that's a recurring monthly cost on top of everything else. How are they affording this?
Well, as I mentioned, the current minimum wage in the country is around 40,000 a month, 40,000 bolivars. And 40,000 is right now currently less than $3 a month.
Wow.
And
oh my God.
As of the current exchange rates. And that's nothing. You go to the store, buy 3 things, and that's it. That's all for the month. So there are some people that have family abroad that can send them money on a regular basis. And of 30 million people that used to live in the country, like 4 million are living abroad. And those people send money to their families. And that's how some people can afford food, and some of them can even afford a new smartphone. And of course, there are also other jobs, like, for example, I don't know, other jobs that pay way larger amounts than just the minimum wage. And of course, these people can afford a smartphone. And it's actually kind of funny to me because socialist policies are supposed to bridge the gap between poor people and rich people, but inequality here is even more prevalent than in capitalist countries. And you have people earning 14,000 bolivars a month. You have people earning thousands of dollars a month. It's kind of crazy, if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely. Big, widespread. Now, importing devices is obviously an option here. What are the challenges in bringing devices from outside of the market and into the country? What are the challenges that people face there?
There are a lot of them. For example, the Trump administration recently imposed sanctions to Venezuela, and you can't ship things directly from the U.S. to the country, or vice versa. And if you go to FedEx or in the U.S., you're going to see a warning that says they're not shipping cargo from the U.S. to Venezuela. And they will ship to Venezuela from literally any part of the world except from the U.S. Now, there are some shipping companies like DHL that have managed to get around the sanctions by simply using connecting flights instead of direct flights. And if you buy something on Amazon and you want it delivered here, your package is going to make a stop in Panama or another country before it's sent to Venezuela. And there are other third-party companies and freight forwarders that will receive package for you. And they repackage them and ship them to Venezuela using this exact same method. So what you do then, if you want to buy something and import it here, is that you simply buy it online or give the money to someone else to buy for you, and you just ship it here using DHL or use one of these freight forwarders. And the other thing I should mention is that maritime shipping is not affected by the sanction. So you can just ship things by sea normally. The sanction just affects airborne shipping.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that you mentioned in your article, custom ROMs come to the rescue here. So you talked about how people will end up flashing custom ROMs when they've got older devices that they still want to be able to use. And so I'm kind of curious about how, is this something that every person is learning how to do? Is this something that's just available to certain folks who are familiar with flashing, or has it kind of become an option that people, have learned about or are learning about in order to make those older devices eke out more use of those?
I know this trend is more prevalent with younger people who are normally more tech savvy, but recently they started catching up with everyday users as well, where the phone is running slow, it's laggy, and the software in them was deprecated by app developers. And there's lots of problems that custom ROMs can solve. But it's definitely not an option available to everyone. There are also lots of cheap Chinese phones laying around that have MediaTek socks, MediaTek system on chips, and are thus impossible to install custom ROMs on them because they don't have kernel sources, or simply they don't have absolutely any third-party development going on. Project Treble has sort of alleviated this issue, since we can now just go for a generic ROM in some devices, in case we don't have a device-specific one. But the older phones have launched way before Project Treble was even conceived by Google. Those devices that do have development, people have sure taken advantage of them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And people are holding on to these devices a lot longer than I imagine in other markets. And, ROMs are going to at least allow them to get, in some cases, these ancient phones onto a very modern version of Android, though it's got to slow things down insanely in order to do that, right? Like the performance has got to drop through the floor, I imagine.
Actually, it doesn't affect it a lot. I have seen cases like the Galaxy S3 or the Galaxy S4 that custom ROMs actually perform better in those phones that the stock ROM does.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I saw that anecdote about the Galaxy S3 for a Twitter user who had tweeted about Venezuelan currency being worth less than, World of Warcraft gold. And so you said that took the Galaxy S3 out of the drawer and installed the custom ROM. And so are these custom ROMs being designed specifically for these older devices to provide performance boosts? Or is it just kind of, well, we found these ones and these ones seem to provide the performance boost?
Well, some of them are optimized, but some of them some of them are specifically optimized for these devices, but others are just, well, we're going to port, say, Android Pie to this phone and see if it runs. Like in the case of the Galaxy S2, I believe it's simply a port. In other cases, they do device-specific performance improvements in order to ensure they perform better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Really fascinating article, and I'm really happy that you wrote it. I think it's important. Like, I know that in myself, I have to check myself sometimes because, we live here in the United States where we take everything for granted, not just smartphones, but I feel like we take so much of our life for granted. And often, the conversation on this network ends up being all about the premium phones and kind of losing sight of the fact that, the entire world is not in the same situation as maybe we are when it comes to what devices, what technology we're able to run, have access to, can afford, all of these things. And your article just really gave me a lot to think about, Arol, and I really appreciate you writing it, and I appreciate you taking time today to join us here on the show. Arol Wright writes for XDA Developers. Yeah, Arol, can people follow you online? Are you on Twitter where people can follow your work?
Yeah, sure. My Twitter username is Arol Wright, just like that. And, well, that's pretty much my only public social network where people can follow me.
Excellent. Well, people definitely...
Of course, they can also read me on SDA.
Yeah. Yep, and I hope that they do. XDA is one of my favorite sites. So appreciate you taking time today, Arol. Thank you so much for hopping on with us. And best of luck.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So increasingly, I find myself giving the old side eye that goes like this.
Oh, don't give me that side eye.
To anything easy and convenient. Free apps, they must be selling my data. Free pizza, they probably have nanobot trackers. Well,
probably.
You get the idea. But what about those phone charging lockers you see in malls and airports? You're supposed to be able to plug in your device in a secure location so you needn't worry about someone walking off with it. It's convenient. And it's free. Eric Ravenscraft took a look at the companies behind these phone charging lockers and discovered what we suspicious folks already knew. Surprise! They're giving away your data. So this was an interesting article in that there was kind of a deep dive into how these different companies work and what they're doing to sort of make money off of us. And, I was never fond of those things anyway, but that's because I'm a bit of a germaphobe.
Yeah, I know. I've always been very suspicious.
It's like, oh, maybe if I, bring my little wipe along, I can put that on there. But it's a way for these lockers to get your information and then give that information to the companies that are setting these up. So essentially, Charge R Us comes along and they say, hey, the Gab, which is what we're calling this clothing store. We want to set up our Charge R Us locker in your store so that customers will come and use it. It kind of increases people coming around.
Yeah.
But when we do that, when you sign the contract and we put the Gab logo on the side of your locker, then we'll let you have their email, their username, and their phone number. Cool.
So it's like almost like a loyalty perk.
It's a way for them to
sort.
get your information, to send you emails and get all of that access. So you think, okay, I'm putting in my phone number and I'm putting in my email so that if it got stolen or something went wrong, I could gain access to it and prove that it's mine.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's still them being able to get the data. And that's kind of what the conversation surrounded. It's a little bit of a dark pattern kind of feel to it because when, it's easy for me when I walk up to the counter at the Gab and the cashier says, and what's your email? As if it needs to be typed in for them to do the purchase.
Right.
I go, oh no, I'm not going to give that to you. Sorry. But when I'm thinking, oh, I want to put my phone in here, you're not having that same thought of like, oh, they're wanting to use my phone number for this or that. Now, I want to read, there's a quote in here from Jen King, the Director of Consumer Privacy at Stanford University's Center for Internet and Society. And Jen King says, we don't ever change our mobile phone numbers, so they become an identifier. In some ways, it's almost like your social security number. The phone number is the thing that they can then use with data brokers to figure out exactly who you are. You type in your phone number and you type in your email, that's 2 points of data. They take those 2 points of data and find other places where you've put in your phone number and email, and they can pretty much guess that it's you. So that's where data brokers start to track your data and track you across all these different things. You walk into the Gap to do the locker, they know you shop at the Gap, and it goes on and on from there. It's kind of skidgy. It's
Man,
not
I'm
great.
never shopping at the Gap.
Yeah, the Gap. Come
Go
on.
away, Gap. the store.
The store that definitely exists.
Yeah, I mean, this is just one of those instances where you are reminded that if it's free, you are the product, right? That old adage that seems to come up time and time again, yet we all still totally fall for it, right? It's hard to pass up free. Although I will say in my own case, anytime I've ever seen these kiosks for charging, like I don't know if I've ever once used them.
Never.
I'm afraid of them for a number of reasons, not just maybe the germ aspect, but I just kind of assume like, oh, I'm going to plug my phone in there and maybe some hacker who's way smarter than I am will have figured something out, on the back end. So now I'm infected with malware, or maybe they pulled off all of my contact data, or maybe exactly this, right? Like data harvesting. That's exactly what's going on.
I don't use the USBs at airplanes. I don't use anything that's get that USB away from me. I'll use my own. Thank you.
I'm afraid of the public USB thing because I don't know what's on the other side of it.
I kind of want to just plug them up so no one uses them, so everybody's safe. But it wasn't me. If you see that out there, that was not me that did that. The one other thing that I'll note, a tip from King, if you are wondering whether a company is legit or not, whether they're using your data in particularly in facial recognition, you can look to Illinois. So it turns out Illinois is the only state in this country that has passed a law where companies have to get affirmative consent before collecting biometric data, and that does include facial recognition. So if the company operates in Illinois, or if they do business there, you can look to their policies that they share via that place, and they have to make it clear that and ask you for affirmative consent to use that data. So it's not a perfect way to find out, but it is a good way. But I do want to, there's one little positive before we go from this, and that is that most of the companies that were looked into here, they are not using your photo or video, because some of them do take your photo. Yeah. Those ones end up getting deleted, or they are on a secure server and have only ever been given away for subpoenas and things like that. And it's very few and far between that's happened. So your name, your phone number, and your email, those are easy to give away. But as it stands right now, face and video and things like that are not. But I wouldn't be surprised if that comes soon.
That's the asterisk that I was going to add. I wouldn't be surprised, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if you suddenly find out that, oh, wait a minute, yeah, you did this under the assumption that it wouldn't be given away. But hey, here we are a year later, and now this is, it's all fair game. Who the heck knows? Oof. Yeah. I will say it's kind of along these lines, but there's a new documentary on Netflix called The Great Hack.
The Great Hack.
And you should absolutely check it out if you have not seen it. It's all about the Cambridge Analytica, all the things that happened around Cambridge Analytica leading up to its kind of, blowout in the legal process, and kind of all the way through it. It follows a couple of key people throughout it. Ooh. But it's a really good, it's like 2.5 hours long. It's a documentary. It's a really good indication of big data and the data that we put out there that we actually share for free in most cases, and just kind of the influence and direction that data goes in, whether you realize it or not, and the power of that data. And I don't know, any way that we can realize that data is like the most valuable asset. Right now, data is so valuable. So don't give it away for free.
Right.
And I say this Yet at the
having
same
done
time, I'm a huge Google fan, so I give it away for free all the time. So like I'm conflicted because I believe on both sides, and it's just such an indication of where we are right now. It's
I
so
honestly
confusing.
think that is the way that we can survive, though, is by having both aspects. It's knowing and making the decision for you. It's just the knowing in the first place that's so important.
Knowing,
because
yeah.
then once you know, you can make those informed decisions.
Totally.
The problem is that so many people don't know, and that's what like we have to change. We have to make it so that people know when and where and how they're giving away their data and why it's important.
More aware, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree. I'm a sucker for a good AI story.
You could have just left it at I'm a sucker. No,
I'm a sucker first. Second, I'm a sucker for a good AI story. Third, I'm also a sucker for whiskey. So it wasn't actually very long ago that Megan Maroney and I chatted about Mac Mira. It's a whiskey that was created by AI in partnership with Microsoft. I still haven't tried it yet. I don't even have it, but I think you can pre-order it now. Now AI is jumping in to taste whiskey so we don't have to, which on second thought, maybe I don't like this at all. University of Glasgow researchers are responsible for creating an AI-driven tool that they call an artificial tongue. It's 99% effective in detecting fake whiskey. Apparently, fake whiskey is plaguing the UK right now to the tune of around £1 billion per year. Whoa. This AI can determine differences in whiskeys that have been aged from 12 to 18 years, let's say, differences between barrels that were used for aging and more. It's literally like a really good whiskey taster and can take a look at what may or may not be a counterfeit liquor or whiskey and say whether it's promise what it promises. Like if it says it's an 18-year and then it tests it and it's only 12, like it can pull that out.
That's neat.
Yeah, pretty interesting.
I need to do that for all of my drinks. So I'm like, why did this have a $17 price? I thought you said this was 10-year. Hold on. Let me get my tongue out.
My artificial tongue. That doesn't look like a tongue. That looks like a computer. They're using it for whiskey here. It could be used to taste pretty much any liquid. It could be used for food safety testing, let's say, security applications, quality control. Researchers tested a number of whiskeys with the system. I'm sure they didn't drink any of it themselves. Oh, no.
So it's like when kings used to have people that tasted their food before they ate it. We now have a robot to do that for us.
Robot! Taste my whiskey.
Does this have peanuts in it? I am allergic.
So obviously good whiskey is a valuable commodity. So therein lies the rub, with it being a big problem with counterfeiting. This is just something I never really was aware of. I didn't realize whiskey was being counterfeited so much. Yeah. There was a Scottish whiskey broker, Rare Whiskey 101, that conducted a study using 55 bottles of rare Scotch just last year. They acquired these bottles from auctions, from private collections, from retailers. 1/3 of the bottles contained fakes, either fake whiskeys or whiskeys that weren't distilled in the year that was declared. So apparently this is like a big thing, and we need robots to solve the problem.
And I think it also just points to the fact that we don't really know. Like, human, they're like,
does it matter?
I can tell this is a 20. And yeah, it doesn't matter because our tongues apparently can't tell the difference.
At the end of the day, does it matter? Is it valuable to you to have this whiskey and to drink it and go, wow, that tastes really good. I think I'll drink it tomorrow. And the moment you realize that thing you liked was actually a 12-year and not an 18-year, do you like it less now? I think for a lot of people, probably they do, just by knowing that. They're like, oh, well, then it's swill.
Yeah, exactly. Get this away from me. For me, I'm like, oh, still tastes good.
Yeah, exactly. I'm all right with that. So send us your whiskey if you don't mind. We would love to drink it.
We'll take your 12-year whiskey that's marked 18 years.
There you go. There's the Mac Mira AI whiskey. You can pre-order now. Okay. All right, well, maybe we'll pre-order it. We'll review it on Hot.
I don't trust it.
I think that's a great idea. Review this whiskey on Hot.
I think we should do that.
All right.
Let's expense it.
Make that happen.
Writing that one down.
Yep, please do. This could be a dual review. Yes. We'll get everyone in.
We should wear
like
red velvet jackets.
Yes. Love it. Tech News Weekly records live every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific at twit.tv/live. You can be part of the show by emailing us your whiskey stories at tnw@twit.tv.
You can also subscribe to our show at twit.tv/TNW. You can follow us on the socials. That's Twitter, that's Instagram, that's thewhiskeylovers.com. And if you want to tweet at me, don't go to that site. And if you want to tweet at me, I'm at Mikah Sargent.
Who knows what you'll find there? We didn't check it before the show, so don't. I'm at Jason Howell on Twitter. Thanks to everyone who helps us do the show. Jeff, John, Colleen, everyone who helps us each and every week. We appreciate you. And thanks to you for watching Tech News Weekly. We'll see y'all next week. What did we agree we were going to do? I'm lost.
This.
Okay, that works.
For now.